Plane was calm, sunlight streaming through the oval windows, passengers settling into their first-class seats with quiet chatter. Flight attendants wheeled carts down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks as the captain's voice reassured everyone of a smooth flight. Then it happened. The peace shattered in seconds. A sharp, piercing scream ripped through the cabin, followed by gasps and the sound of something being knocked over. Every head turned at once. In the middle of first class stood a woman, furious, red-faced and wild-eyed. She was yelling at the top of her lungs, her words tumbling out like venom. People shrank back in their seats, unsure whether to speak up or stay silent. And then, before anyone could process what was happening, she raised her hand and slapped a man sitting just 2 seats away. The crack echoed in the quiet cabin like thunder. People gasped. A baby started crying. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" But the man she had just struck didn't flinch. He sat there with an unreadable expression, calm as stone. No one knew yet that he wasn't just another passenger. He was an air marshal, trained to handle dangerous situations thousands of feet above the ground. The woman stood above him, chest heaving, daring him to respond. The air seemed to freeze as everyone waited. Tension wrapped the cabin tight, passengers gripping their armrests, breaths held, waiting for the storm to break. What would he do? Strike back, call for help, or simply ignore her? Seconds felt like minutes, and then his move came. What happened next was so unexpected, so perfectly executed, that the passengers of Flight 482 would never forget it. By the end, the entire cabin was on its feet, clapping and cheering louder than the engines outside. The morning sun was high when passengers began boarding. Flight 482, bound for Los Angeles. The bright light flooded the wide airport windows, glinting off the silver body of the plane as ground staff loaded luggage. Inside the jet bridge, people shuffled forward, dragging carry-ons and clutching passports, while attendants greeted them with the kind of practiced warmth that made everyone feel at ease. For most, this was just another ordinary flight on an ordinary day. Nobody could have guessed that by the time the plane landed, the story of this flight would be the subject of hushed conversations, viral videos, and unforgettable memories. First class was already filling up, its leather seats gleaming under the sunlight pouring through the oval windows. The mood there was calm and light. A businessman tapped at his laptop, answering last-minute emails. A young couple whispered and laughed, their excitement at traveling together written all over their faces. Across the aisle, a mother was showing her son how to fasten his seatbelt, her tone patient and kind. Even the air seemed softer and first class quieter, more relaxed, as though the world outside was far away. In seat 2A sat a man who blended in so well he might as well have been invisible. He wore a plain navy jacket, a light gray shirt, and had a magazine open across his lap. His short-cropped hair was neatly kept, his face calm, unreadable. To anyone glancing at him, he looked like a mid-level professional, perhaps a consultant or an accountant, tired from work and looking forward to a smooth trip. No one paid him much attention, and that was exactly how he liked it. His name was Ethan Cole, though no one here knew that. What no one realized either was that Ethan wasn't just another passenger. He was an air marshal, armed, trained, and on duty. The flight attendants moved with ease, checking overhead bins, offering assistance, making polite conversation. They smiled when spoken to and kept their tone light, though anyone trained to notice body language could see the signs of mild exhaustion. Morning flights were busy, but this one promised to be straightforward. The captain's voice had already drifted over the speakers, calm and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 482. We'll be cruising today at 35,000 feet. Weather looks clear along our route, so sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." And for a time, that was exactly what everyone did. The wheels lifted off the runway with a gentle roar, the engines humming steadily as the ground dropped away. First-class passengers leaned back in their wide seats, some closing their eyes, some ordering champagne, others flipping through in-flight magazines. The flight attendants moved the drink carts slowly, filling glasses, offering fruit bowls, smiling with the kind of grace that comes from endless practice. Ethan Cole barely glanced up, his eyes scanning the cabin in quiet observation. It was then that she made her presence known. At first, it was nothing more than a sharp sigh, loud enough to turn a few heads but not enough to disturb the cabin. A woman in her late 40s, dressed in a designer blouse and heavy jewelry, shifted dramatically in seat 1C. She waved her hand at the flight attendant like she was swatting away a fly. Excuse me, hello." Her voice was sharp, commanding, the kind that pierced through the general hum of the cabin. The attendant hurried over with a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am. Can I get you something?" "This champagne is warm," the woman snapped, holding her glass aloft as though it were poisoned. "Do you people not know how to do anything properly? First class should mean first-class service. I paid good money for this seat." The attendant kept her expression pleasant, though her eyes flickered with the faintest trace of discomfort. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. I'll bring you a fresh glass right away." "You'd better," the woman muttered, tossing the glass back onto the tray so quickly that it sloshed over the edge. A few drops landed on her neighbor's sleeve, and he frowned, shifting slightly away from her. She didn't apologize. The incident seemed small at first, just the kind of entitled behavior that airline staff had dealt with countless times before. But Ethan noticed something. The woman's eyes were restless, darting around, her breathing shallow and quick. Her movements were sharp, almost aggressive. He marked her in his mind, watching quietly over the top of his magazine. The fresh champagne was delivered, but her attitude didn't improve. She complained about the temperature of the cabin, about the pillows, about the way the passenger in front of her reclined his seat. Every small thing became a mountain in her mind, and her voice carried across the cabin like nails on glass. Some passengers rolled their eyes. Others tried to pretend they couldn't hear. A few exchanged sympathetic looks with the attendants. Ethan stayed quiet, observing. This wasn't the first time he had seen a passenger lose their composure. Still, something about her was different. Her anger wasn't just irritation, it was building. And when anger builds at 35,000 feet, it rarely ends well. By the time the plane leveled out above the clouds, the woman's volume had grown. She shouted for a manager, demanded to see the captain, and insulted a young attendant to the point where her eyes watered. "Do you even speak English properly?" she sneered, her voice dripping with cruelty. The attendant, cheeks flushed, retreated to the galley with a whispered apology. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered, others turned in their seats to stare. A child in row 3 buried his face in his mother's side, frightened by the woman's sharp tone. The peace that had filled first class was quickly unraveling, replaced by a tension that clung to the air like static before a storm. And then, for a moment, silence. The woman turned back to her seat, muttering to herself, her jewelry clinking as she fidgeted. She sipped at her champagne, glaring at anyone who dared look at her too long. The cabin exhaled, everyone hoping the outburst was over. But Ethan knew better. He had seen storms before, and this one was only beginning to form. He sat still, flipping a page of his magazine, his eyes never truly leaving her. For now, she was just noise. But noise has a way of turning into chaos, and when it did, he knew he would be ready. The engines hummed steadily, the sunlight washed over the cabin, and for a brief stretch of time, the illusion of calm returned. But the passengers of Flight 482 didn't know what was coming. Soon, that woman's anger would explode like thunder, and when it did, the entire plane would hold its breath, waiting for anyone to stop her. And in the quiet of seat away, Ethan Cole, the man no one noticed, prepared himself for what he already knew. Before this flight was over, he would have to act. The steady hum of the engines filled the cabin as the flight attendants prepared for meal service. The sun outside was bright, spilling through the oval windows and painting soft light across the rows of passengers. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee and warm bread rolls as trays were set up. For most, this was the time to settle and need to relax, maybe watch a movie before the hours of travel stretched ahead. But in first class, peace was hanging by a thread. The woman in seat 1C was restless again. She drummed her manicured nails on the armrest, each tap sharp and impatient. Her eyes darted from the flight attendant in the aisle to the man across from her who dared recline his seat a few inches. Her lips pursed tightly, her irritation visible in every twitch of her body. She leaned forward suddenly, waving her hand like a flag. "Excuse me, are you deaf?" she barked at the nearest attendant. "I've been waiting 10 minutes for my food." 10 minutes? Do you think my time is worthless?" The attendant, already carrying a tray, tried to soothe her. "I apologize, ma'am. We're serving in order, but I'll bring your meal as soon as possible." "That's not good enough," the woman snapped. Her voice cut through the calm like broken glass. "This is first class. I don't pay thousands of dollars to be treated like economy trash." People shifted in their seats. Some whispered under their breath. Others stared outright, their patience wearing thin. The businessman closed his laptop and sighed. The couple exchanged nervous looks, and the mother tightened her hold on her son, trying to shield him from the angry voice. But the woman wasn't finished. She turned her fury on the man in front of her who reclined his seat again. "Just an inch. Are you serious?" she screeched. "Do you have no respect? You're practically in my lap." The man, startled, tried to explain. I just leaned back a little, ma'am. There's still plenty of room." She scoffed loudly. "Don't you dare tell me what's plenty of room. You're crushing me, and I won't tolerate it." She slammed her hands against the back of his seat, startling him so much he jumped forward. A ripple of gasps spread through the cabin. At that moment, Ethan Cole, quiet in seat 2A, folded his magazine shut. He had been watching closely since the first champagne complaint. And now her behavior was sliding from annoying to dangerous. Physical aggression inside an aircraft was no small matter. His jaw tightened, though he stayed seated, knowing she wasn't finished escalating yet. The woman's tirade shifted again. She locked eyes with a young attendant trying to hand her a meal tray. "Is this supposed to be food?" she demanded, staring at the chicken and vegetables. "This is garbage. You expect me to eat this slop? I wouldn't feed this to my dog." Her voice rose higher, drawing the attention of passengers in business class just behind the curtain. Someone muttered, "Oh, for God's sake," and another whispered, "She's unbelievable." The woman seemed to feed off the reactions, growing bolder with every outburst. Ethan noticed the attendants exchanging looks of worry. One discreetly picked up the cabin phone, likely preparing to call the captain. He knew what that meant. If things kept escalating, this flight could be diverted. Nobody wanted that. And then it happened. The woman turned on Ethan himself. Maybe it was because he had been too calm, too unbothered while everyone else shrank back. Maybe she saw his composure as defiance. Whatever it was, her eyes locked on him, burning with fury. "You," she shouted, pointing directly at him. The cabin stilled. "Don't sit there smirking at me like you're better than everyone else." Ethan raised his eyes, his voice steady. "I haven't said a word." "Ma'am, liar," she screamed. "You've been staring at me this whole time, judging me. Don't think I don't notice." A murmur swept through the passengers. Heads turned back and forth between them, the tension climbing higher. Ethan didn't move, his calm demeanor only making her angrier. "Say something," she demanded. "Say it to my face." Ethan closed his magazine carefully and set it aside. His tone was even, almost gentle. "Ma'am, I think you need to calm down." That single word calm was like gasoline on fire. She let out a sharp scream and, before anyone could react, raised her hand high and struck him across the face with a violent slap. The sound cracked through the cabin, louder than the engines, louder than the whispers. A gasp broke from every throat at once. The businessman's jaw dropped. The mother covered her son's eyes. A young woman clapped a hand to her mouth in shock. Even the flight attendants froze in place. For a heartbeat, the cabin was utterly silent, the echo of the slap hanging in the air like thunder. Ethan's head barely moved from the impact. He sat still, his expression unchanged, his eyes locked on hers. She stood over him, chest heaving, her face red with fury. The silence stretched, every passenger holding their breath. And then Ethan spoke, his voice steady and calm, but carrying through the entire cabin. "Ma'am," he said clearly, "you just assaulted a federal officer." The woman blinked, confusion flashing in her eyes. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Murmurs swept the cabin. What did he say? Did he say federal officer? Is he an air marshal? Ethan reached calmly into his jacket and pulled out his badge, holding it up for everyone to see. "Air Marshal Ethan Cole," he announced. His voice was controlled, professional. "You are now under restraint for the safety of this aircraft and every person aboard." Passengers gasped again, this time in awe. The businessman muttered, "Oh my God." She slapped a marshal. The couple whispered excitedly, and someone behind whispered, "Finally." The woman's face drained of color, but her pride didn't let her back down. She shrieked, "You can't arrest me. I did nothing wrong." She tried to pull back, but Ethan was already on his feet, towering over her with calm authority. The attendants, now emboldened, stepped aside to let him work. In one swift, practiced motion, Ethan caught her wrist and guided her arms behind her back. She struggled, screamed, even tried to kick, but his grip was firm without being violent. He pulled restraint ties from his pocket and secured her hands. "Ma'am, you are restrained until we land," he said evenly. "You will remain seated in the back of the cabin." She screamed again, demanding her rights, her lawyer, anything but Ethan remained calm, steering her down the aisle as passengers stared in shock. A few clapped quietly, others whispered, but most sat wide-eyed, stunned by what had just unfolded before them. When Ethan returned to his seat a few minutes later, the cabin was different. The tension had broken, replaced by murmurs of admiration and relief. A soft ripple of applause began, hesitant at first, then growing stronger until nearly the whole cabin was clapping. Ethan sat down, picked up his magazine and reopened it as if nothing had happened. Around him, passengers exchanged amazed looks. Nobody would forget the sound of that slap or the calm, unshakable way he had responded. For the rest of the flight, the woman sat restrained in the back, her angry voice muffled by distance. But the memory of that moment lingered in every passenger's mind. The slap had shaken the cabin, but the air marshal's response had restored their faith that order and justice still existed, even 35,000 feet in the air. The cabin buzzed with a strange, heavy silence after the slap. Passengers were still reeling from the shock of what they had just witnessed, the sharp sound of the woman's hand against Ethan's face still echoing in their minds. But what left them more stunned wasn't the slap itself, it was Ethan's response. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't lost his temper, and he hadn't even flinched. Instead, he revealed himself with absolute calm. An air marshal, sworn to protect everyone on that flight. When he restrained the furious woman and walked her down the aisle, all eyes followed. Every head turned, some wide with awe, others with relief. The businessman shook his head and whispered, "Unbelievable." The young couple grinned, whispering to each other like they were witnessing a scene out of a movie. The mother in row 3 gave Ethan a look of gratitude, her child finally peeking out from behind her arm to watch as the loudest voice on the plane was silenced. But the woman, even with her hands bound behind her back, refused to surrender. As Ethan guided her firmly down the aisle toward an empty row near the back, she screamed insults over her shoulder. "This is illegal. You can't touch me. I'll sue this entire airline. I'll have your badge. You'll regret this." Her words poured out like venom, but without her freedom to lash out physically, they carried less weight. Her kicks barely reached the carpet as Ethan's grip kept her steady. Passengers she passed shrank back, some clutching their armrests, others simply staring in disbelief. A few muttered under their breath. About time someone stopped her, and she should have been kicked off before takeoff at the back. Ethan eased her into a window seat, securing the restraint ties around the armrest so she couldn't lash out again. The flight attendants hovered nearby, relief etched into their faces, ready to assist if needed. She thrashed for a moment, testing the ties, then leaned back, breathing heavily, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. "You can't do this to me," she hissed, her voice dropping but still venomous. "Do you know who I am? I know people, important people. You'll pay for this." Ethan's expression didn't change. "You've endangered passengers and assaulted a federal officer," he said firmly but evenly. "That has consequences. For the safety of everyone aboard. You'll remain restrained until we land." He turned without waiting for her response, leaving her sputtering in frustration as he walked back toward first class. The cabin watched him return like he was a soldier walking off a battlefield. Passengers shifted, some sitting straighter, others whispering in admiration. When Ethan sat back down in seat 2A, the applause began again, this time, louder, fuller, and unashamed. Dozens of hands clapped together, filling the air with a sound of gratitude and unity. Some even stood halfway, craning their necks to see him better. The businessman clapped slowly, nodding in respect. The couple joined eagerly, smiling wide. The mother clapped too, her son joining in with small, enthusiastic hands. Ethan acknowledged them with the faintest nod, then quietly reopened his magazine, flipping to the next page as though nothing extraordinary had happened. It was that calmness, that ability to return to normal, that impressed people the most. He didn't bask in the applause, didn't need their praise, he simply did his duty. And that was enough. The attendants, now free from the shadow of the woman's wrath, moved more easily down the aisles. Their voices softened back to professional warmth, though one of them, a young woman with tired eyes, paused briefly by Ethan's seat. She leaned slightly closer and whispered, "Thank you." Ethan glanced up and offered her a polite nod. "Just doing my job." Still, the tension of the incident lingered in the air. Conversations rippled through the cabin, passengers replaying the moment, retelling it in hushed tones as if the story had already begun to grow into legend. "Did you see her face when he showed the badge?" One whispered, "I thought she was going to faint." Another added, "I've never seen anyone handle someone like that so calm, so professional." Not everyone was entirely settled, though. The restrained woman's muffled shouts occasionally drifted from the back, a harsh reminder of the chaos that had nearly consumed the flight. Each time her voice rose, heads turned slightly, waiting to see if she would try something again. But Ethan remained unreadable, his steady presence a silent reassurance that if she tried anything else, he would handle it. As the meal service resumed, the passengers began to relax. The businessman reopened his laptop, though he kept glancing at Ethan with something like respect. The young couple leaned toward each other, their conversation animated as they replayed every detail. The mother finally relaxed enough to eat her meal, her son calmer now, his wide eyes no longer filled with fear. Ethan accepted his own tray quietly, eating without a word, his magazine still resting at his side. To anyone looking at him, he seemed almost ordinary again, a man enjoying a meal mid-flight. But to the others, he had already become something more, someone who had stepped up when no one else could. Hours stretched on, and slowly the energy in the cabin shifted back toward normal. Laughter returned, whispers softened, and the hum of the engines reclaimed its place as the dominant sound. The restrained woman eventually grew tired, her voice hoarse, her protests fewer and farther between. She slumped in her seat, muttering to herself, her power stripped away by the quiet discipline of one man. For Ethan, the job wasn't over. His eyes scanned the cabin now and then, his senses alert, his calm an anchor for everyone else. But deep down, he knew the hardest part was already behind them. The storm had come, the slap had landed, and order had been restored. The passengers would carry this story with them long after they landed. Some would tell it over dinner, others would post about it online, and a few might even exaggerate the details. But one thing would remain true. When chaos erupted 35,000 feet in the air, it was stopped by the calm hand of a man who knew exactly what to do. And though Ethan Cole never sought recognition, in that cabin filled with relieved passengers, he had earned their silent respect. The applause had faded, but the memory of it lingered in the air like sunlight, warm, steady, and undeniable. For a while, peace returned to Flight 482. The hum of the engines was steady, the sunlight through the windows warm, and the passengers in first class finally felt they could relax. Trays were cleared, drinks refilled, and conversations grew lighter. Some leaned back to watch movies, others flipped through books. The chaos of earlier seemed far away, tucked into the back of the plane with the woman who had caused it. But peace aboard an airplane is fragile, especially when anger is left to fester. The restrained woman sat in the last row of first class, her hands tied firmly to the armrest. At first, she thrashed and shouted, but when no one reacted, she shifted strategies. Her voice softened, and she began muttering loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This is abuse," she said in a trembling tone. "I've been assaulted, tied up like an animal. What if I can't breathe properly? What if I get blood clots? Do any of you care? A man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably but didn't respond. The others nearby avoided eye contact. They remembered the venom of her screams earlier, the slap, the insults. Sympathy was in short supply. Still, she pressed on. Please, someone help me, she begged, her tone dramatic. This Marshal, he's lying. He's abusing his power. I'm just a woman who asked for decent service. Is that a crime? Do you want to live in a country where people can be tied down for speaking the truth? Her words were designed to stir doubt, to make others second-guess what they had witnessed. A few passengers exchanged glances, uneasy but unconvinced. The memory of a hand striking Ethan's face was still too fresh to forget. Back in seat 2A, Ethan noticed the shift in tone. He didn't turn immediately. He knew her type. When brute force failed, manipulation followed. He waited, listening, his eyes casually scanning the reflection in the window opposite. Minutes later, the woman's act crumbled. Her voice rose again, sharper now, dripping with rage. You're all sheep, she shouted suddenly, startling those around her. You just sit there and clap like idiots while they strip away your rights. You're pathetic, all of you. Gasps rippled through the cabin, but this time, passengers didn't shrink back. They had endured enough of her poison. The businessman muttered, unbelievable, shaking his head. The young couple rolled their eyes. The mother in row 3 whispered something calming to her son, but this time her face showed no fear, only annoyance. The flight attendants exchanged nervous looks again, one discreetly reaching for the intercom. But before she could speak, Ethan stood. His quiet rise caught everyone's attention. The cabin hushed instantly, as though the engines themselves had softened to let him speak. He walked calmly down the aisle, his steps unhurried, his posture relaxed yet authoritative. Every passenger's eyes followed him. When he stopped at the restrained woman's row, she glared up at him with fury and desperation. Untie me right now, she demanded, her voice cracking. This is unlawful. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Ethan's expression didn't change. His voice was even measured, carrying clearly through the cabin. You've disrupted this flight, assaulted passengers and crew, and attempted to create panic. You are restrained for the safety of this aircraft, and you will remain restrained until we land. That is the end of the matter. His calmness was more powerful than any shout. Passengers leaned in, absorbing every word. The woman thrashed again, her jewelry clinking against the seat. No, you can't do this. Someone stop him. He's abusing me. But instead of joining her, the passengers turned their eyes away. A few shook their heads. One even muttered, serves you right. Seeing she had no allies, her rage turned personal again. She hissed at Ethan, low and venomous. You think you've won? You think tying me up makes you the hero? You'll regret this when my lawyer destroys you. Ethan crouched slightly so his voice reached only her ears, though nearby passengers could still sense his calm presence. Ma'am, threats won't change reality. When we land, law enforcement will be waiting. You can explain everything to them. Her face paled. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. For the first time since the flight began, she seemed to realize the seriousness of her actions. The fight drained from her in uneven breaths, though her eyes still smoldered with resentment. Ethan stood tall again, turned, and walked back to his seat. The moment he sat down, a ripple of quiet relief spread through the cabin. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, the tension easing once more. But the woman wasn't finished, not completely. Half an hour later, as the captain announced their descent into Los Angeles, she launched into one final desperate performance. This is all lies, she cried, her voice cracking. I'm the victim here. That man is dangerous. Can't you see? He's abusing his power. Help me, please. Someone help me. Her voice carried, but this time, no one listened. Passengers were focused on stowing their trays, adjusting their seatbelts, and preparing for landing. The attendants ignored her too, moving professionally down the aisle. The only acknowledgement she received came from a child a few rows back. The boy, now braver than before, turned in his seat and said bluntly, "You're mean." His mother hushed him quickly, but a ripple of quiet laughter spread through the rows. The woman's face twisted in outrage, but no words followed. She sat fuming, glaring at everyone. Her voice finally silenced as the wheels touched down and the plane taxied toward the gate. A different kind of energy filled the cabin. Passengers smiled, shared looks of relief, even whispered about the stories they would tell once they got off. The nightmare of the flight was nearly over, and in their minds, one man had stood as the barrier between chaos and safety. Ethan said nothing, but his presence spoke enough. He sat quietly, seatbelt fastened, watching the runway roll past the window. His job wasn't done yet. He would escort her off the plane, hand her over to airport security, and file his report. But for now, his calm composure was the anchor holding the cabin steady. And as the plane slowed to a stop, the restrained woman muttered bitterly under her breath, defeated but still defiant. She had tried rage. She had tried manipulation. She had tried to win sympathy. None of it worked. All that remained was the cold truth. Her actions had consequences, and this time she wouldn't escape them. The plane slowed as it rolled toward the gate, the hum of the engines dropping to a low rumble. The captain's calm voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. For those connecting to other flights, please check the monitors inside the terminal. For those ending your journey here, we thank you for flying with us today. For most passengers, those words meant relief. Relief that the long flight was over. Relief that they could stretch their legs and leave the confinement of the cabin. But on Flight 482, that relief carried an extra layer. The knowledge that the storm that had shaken the skies above was finally ending. The woman in the back, her hands still tied to the armrest, shifted restlessly in her seat. Her face was pale but twisted with fury, her lips moving silently as she muttered curses under her breath. She looked around desperately, her eyes scanning for any last bit of sympathy, but she found none. Every passenger had turned their attention to gathering belongings, checking phones, or watching the windows as the terminal drew closer. She was invisible now, ignored by those she had once terrorized. Ethan Cole, seated quietly in Tua, fastened his belt until the plane came to a full stop. His posture was relaxed, his expression calm, but his eyes flicked once toward the restrained woman, ensuring she remained no threat. Then he turned back to the window, watching the jet bridge extend toward the door. The familiar chime sounded, and the head flight attendant spoke with practiced calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until we arrive at the gate. We have a brief security matter that requires attention before December. Thank you for your cooperation." Passengers exchanged curious glances. Most already knew what security matter meant. Whispers spread. "They're here for her. She's going to get arrested." Finally, a few moments later, the cabin door opened. Bright daylight spilled inside, along with the unmistakable presence of two uniformed law enforcement officers. They stepped aboard with quiet authority, their eyes scanning quickly until Ethan stood and gestured toward the back. "She's restrained and awaiting transfer," he said clearly, his badge visible in his hand. The woman's composure cracked instantly. As the officers approached, she began screaming, her voice sharp and frantic. "No, this is a mistake. You can't take me like this. He assaulted me. He's lying. Do you know who I am?" Her words tumbled out in a torrent of desperation. The officers ignored her pleas, moving with calm precision. One of them nodded at Ethan, then bent to release the restraint ties just long enough to transfer her wrists into steel handcuffs. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut echoed through the cabin. "Firm and final, ma'am. You were under arrest for interfering with a flight crew and assaulting a federal officer," one officer announced in a professional tone. Her screams grew louder, higher edged with panic. "No, this is outrageous. You can't do this. Someone, tell them I didn't do anything wrong." She twisted in her seat, her eyes wide, desperate for someone to stand up on her behalf, but no one moved. Not a single passenger spoke in her defense. Instead, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the shuffle of her restraints and the officer's steady commands. Her eyes darted across the faces of those she had insulted, threatened, and frightened, but each one looked away. Some glared coldly, others sat stone-faced. She had burned every bridge, and now she was alone. Ethan stood to the side, calm, watchful, ensuring the process went smoothly. The officers guided her to her feet. She struggled, her voice cracking. "This isn't over. I'll sue all of you. I'll destroy this airline. You'll regret this." The officers held her firmly, steering her toward the cabin door. The passengers watched in silence, the weight of the moment pressing heavily over them. And then, just as her voice began to fade toward the jet bridge, something unexpected happened. Clapping. It started softly, a few passengers near the front pressing their hands together. Then more joined in. The applause spread like a wave, rolling through the cabin louder and louder, until nearly every person was on their feet, clapping in unison. The officers didn't react, staying focused on their task, but the woman's face twisted in disbelief. "You're all insane," she screamed as she was guided off the plane. Her words vanished the moment she was escorted beyond the door, swallowed by the bright terminal air. The applause lingered for a moment, then slowly faded. The passengers turned their attention back to Ethan, who stood quietly near his seat. All eyes were on him. The businessman spoke first. "Thank you," he said, his voice firm and full of respect. The couple chimed in with a "You were amazing," and the mother from row 3 mouthed silently, "Thank you," her hand resting on her child's shoulder. The ripple of gratitude spread, passengers nodding, some even approaching to shake his hand. Ethan accepted their thanks with calm humility, never raising his voice, never boasting. "Just doing my job," he repeated, his words steady, his presence unshakable. When the officers returned to the cabin to confirm the woman had been removed, the passengers began gathering their bags. The line to disembark formed, but the atmosphere was lighter, filled with quiet conversations, relieved laughter, and words of admiration for the man who had handled the storm. As Ethan walked toward the exit with the others, people stepped aside respectfully, allowing him to pass first. At the doorway, the head flight attendant gave him a nod filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done this without you," she said softly. Ethan simply nodded back. "Stay safe," he replied. Stepping out into the daylight, the passengers of Flight 482 would never forget what they had witnessed. One woman's meltdown, one Marshal's calm, and the moment when justice had unfolded in the sky. By the time they told their families, their friends, and eventually the world, the story would grow, But the truth would remain. Order had been restored not by force, but by calm authority and steady resolve. And for Ethan Cole, the air marshal who returned to silence as easily as he stepped into action, it was just another day on the job.